Hey, I think that I was able to accomplish this well. So, welcome to the first word on a Wednesday in 2022. It's been a while since I've done this, and I am excited. Let me rephrase that. I'm always excited to be able to have a live conversation and share thoughts and feelings and expressions. I can have some hesitancy when I feel like some of those thoughts, feelings, expressions can be triggering, can create trauma, can create not positive feelings. And so tonight, I wanted to take some time to speak on and reflect on the the television series called Women of the Movement. And so I felt that maybe I had made some observations, and I felt like, hey sis, I felt like I had made some observations and I had feelings that other people could relate to. And I'm definitely the type of person who feels like, does anybody else see this? Does anybody else feel this? Does anybody else is anybody else on this wavelength? And so that's why I decided to talk about the film and really kind of synthesize some of the things that I felt in watching the series. I also want to say that I'm going to try to talk about this series in a way that, hey Tony, thanks for joining. I'm going to try to talk about this series in a way that doesn't give spoiler alerts, although everyone should know what happened with that history. The TV series wasn't fabricated. It's real life. Hello. It's based off of the real experience of the murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy in Money, Mississippi. It's very much rooted in his mother's experience of fighting for justice, of seeking justice. So, Emmett Till, the Women of the Movement, it's on ABC. And the series is kind of documenting, like a fictionized documenting of what happened to Emmett and his mom and the community when it happened. And so it's really informative in a lot of ways, because I do think they do some kind of behind the scenes filling in some of the gaps of that history, things that they know now that they didn't know when it initially occurred in 1955, I believe. So anyway, the point is I'm going to try to talk about this series without giving spoiler alerts, although technically we already know that his murderers weren't tried. We know that the woman, Caroline Bryant, who accused him of winking at her or whatever, has since reneged on what occurred, what didn't occur on that day. So again, not really giving spoiler alerts of the series, but also know that that's real history. So at the top, what I want to say is watching this docu-series about events that happened in 1955 brought up a lot of feelings about the status of Black lives in 2022. And that's not something that is new. Black people make those kind of statements every day about how this thing X that occurred today is similar to Y that occurred then, which goes to show you that America's run on anti-Blackness and that machine consistently works. It's consistently violent. It's consistently insidious. And so it shouldn't shock us when things that happen today feel similar to something that happened historically, because all of the mechanisms and the machines that would allow Emmett Till to be murdered for allegedly winking at a white woman, those same machines and systems work today that would make that same thing manifest. So the first thing, I guess the way I would describe it is things that I saw that were real then that I would still say are very real now is that Mamie Till, Emmett's mother, who was pursuing justice for him, was met with so much resistance. His murder was already traumatic enough as is, but her fighting and seeking justice for her son was even more like resistance as she tried to work through the systems and use the resources she had to speak to her son's humanity in a world that didn't see him as human. And so I think one of the first things that stood out to me about the film is that it was a reminder that Black parenting is resistance. And I want to be really clear that Black parents in particular, and it doesn't matter how Black parents are showing up, and I've said this before in various public spaces, whether they're showing up on like doing all the right things or the best things, or they are struggling to fill those gaps. Black parenting in all of its forms is resistance. And I say that that's resistance because the Americas, so rather we're talking North, Central, South, but in the context of this conversation, obviously we're talking about the United States. But there was never an intention for Black parents to parent. And I just cannot say that enough. All right. I try to really say this often, frequently in various spaces. When African people were brought over during chattel enslavement, the goal was for them to be able to procreate for breeding purposes. All right. That was the goal. That was why people were able to be in partnerships. They were able to form couples because in chattel slavery, people weren't the enslaved were not legally allowed to be married, right? So if their owners did feel comfortable allowing them to cohabitate, that wasn't born from a place of oh, they deserve right and love and intimacy. It was for breeding purposes. So that means that Black children born of those unions weren't that wasn't a manifestation of that radical intimacy between those people. The intention was that their children could be used as chattel, that children could be product. And we need to be aware of that. So that is what I mean when I say Black parenting is an act of resistance. When Black parents show up to school board meetings, parent-teacher conferences, to the piano recital, to the, all of that is an act of resistance in a country. And some people might listen to this and say, oh, well, that was so long ago. I mean, no. Corrine Gaines, our fallen sister in Baltimore, who was protecting her children when police invaded her home and gunned her down and murdered her, and also shot her son as well. She was attempting to protect her children. So Black parents are showing up, attempting to protect their kids, attempting to provide for their children, and all those things. And that is constantly met with resistance. And so then we ought not be surprised if Black parenting isn't supported, right? If Black parents weren't intended to parent, then we shouldn't be shocked that Black children aren't safe either. And so it's not shocking to have this list at this point. I mean, I can't even tell you how many Black children have been victims of state-sanctioned murder. It's not shocking that someone like Michaela Bryant couldn't be protected through the police state, because we are not deserving. Black children aren't deserving of protection, and Black parents' desires to protect and provide resource and all those things are damn near made eliminated, because the goal is not for Black parents to actively parent. The goal is not to see active Black familying, right? The goal is to diminish that and continuously see us as not human and product. So that's the first takeaway, that Mamie tried so hard to protect Emmett and did her bestest, right? Even in his murder, even in his death, but was met with so much violence because, again, the intention was never for her to fully parent her kid in the first place. The second thing, which kind of builds off of what I was saying, in fact, almost everything we do as Black people, as the descendants of Africans in this country, as descendants of, notice, like, I'm not just saying the enslaved, although some of us are the descendants of enslaved folks too, but our history is much deeper and wider. But everything we do in this country is damn near an act of resistance. So Black parenting is an act of resistance because it's a defiant move against treating your children like chattel. Black joy is resistance, and today so many beautiful Black women creators reminded me of that. If you're not following Ebony Janice, if you're not following Nikki Black, Monique Milton, I feel like all three of them ministered to me today about the importance of Black joy. So showing up for yourself and having pleasure and having those sensory experiences, that is resistance, right? Because a lot of times I think we feel like we have to be showing up in certain places to fight white supremacy, to fight violent systems. But you singing a song with your music loud, driving down the street, right, singing to the top of your lungs, that is resistance. That is a revolutionary act because you're living in joy when so many of these systems would have you living in fear and disempowerment. And then that leads to this third component, which is Black rest is resistance too. Again, I'm just making shout outs all the time. If you're not following the NAP ministry, it is super important. And I just think it's something that should be built in our days and support, amplify, provide financial blessings, honor, all those things to the NAP ministry because our rest is resistance. And I want to spend a little time to break this down. So again, when we're talking about the United States and we're talking about chattel enslavement, we realize that abundance of Africans were brought here with the intention to labor and to labor for free. So what that means is, we've heard that phrase sun up to sundown, and that was really very much the code of the day, right? You work, that's it. And everything else that is given to you is given to you to maintain a product, right? And so I hope that people hear my heart here. But I'm also aware of the impact of this metaphor I'm about to use. But hopefully I can paint a bigger picture with this metaphor. If I didn't have to take my car to get regular oil changes, I wouldn't. It's costly. When I go to the oil change place, they ask me questions I don't know shit about. They always say, you need this and this and this. Part of that is because I'm a single woman. I'm just like, I don't know what y'all are talking about. Do all the things. But if I didn't have to, I wouldn't. If I didn't have to maintain my car, if I could just keep driving it without having to go places and pay people to mind it, I wouldn't do it. And so there's no such thing as a benevolent slave owner. That's a fallacy. So even when the enslaved were allowed to eat food and to take some time off, that was largely about maintenance. It was not about care. It wasn't about concern. It wasn't about seeing them as humans or valuing them. It was about maintaining a product, maintaining the workforce, the labor force, right? And we have to be honest enough with ourselves about that and stop allowing larger powers to whitewash history and make that benevolence seem like care when it wasn't. And so rest is a resistive act because it's saying you can't use my personhood, you can't use my body to the extent that I have nothing else left for myself. All right. Rest is resistance. And I'm not even talking about we have to kind of define what rest means for each other, right? Because so much of the work that I've done, my livelihood has been tied to me being able to process ideas and think. So arguably you can say, oh, well, rest is for Kina, like she's taking a nap. But usually even when I'm like horizontal, my brain is still on. So rest for me may not look like taking a nap. Rest for me might literally look like me sitting outside and reading a book about jokes, right? I mean, or just like sticking my hand in my pots with my plants and trying to keep them alive. So I don't even want to give you like a set definition of rest, because for each of us, I think it's so personal, and figuring out what are those things that allow me to be still, allow me to be quiet within myself, allow me to hear myself, to heal my, like, fit to deep, like to breathe deeply. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's so good, right? So again, what are those things that allow us to get that full body sensory experience, to let us breathe from the diaphragm? And so I think the larger thing about Women of the Movement is that it's reminding me that resistance in our community really means so much things that we take for granted. Resistance is Black parenting. Resistance is Black joy. Resistance is Black rest. All of those things that we wouldn't necessarily associate with being on the front lines. That is not to say that activism that takes place in the form of protests and marches doesn't matter, or to diminish that, because that's very powerful. But I want people to know that you're doing revolutionary things in your everyday life, and I think you should name it as such. Which leads us to the second thing. About a year ago, I started it was like one of those things where I took it in for me, and then once I took it in for me, I wanted to distribute it to other people. And so what I encourage all Black people to do is have a posture of demand, right? And that means that we really have to walk around with a deep knowing that I am owed something, right? And so one of the things that helped me figure this out is when I started to learn more about enslavement. And I'm so thankful to Tony, the ghetto activist, who is consistently challenging us to always think about who we are outside of enslavement, and that we have this deep and full history that is so much more than being put on boats and brought to the Americas. But for me, it was in learning about chattel enslavement that I really started to recognize, oh shit, y'all owe me money. And not just money though, right? Like, I really want to be clear. It's not just money that is owed. That is a debt that can never be repaid. But there is something, like, y'all, let's just keep it a buck. If you've ever been around someone who owes you actual money, like, your energy is different. You get what I'm saying? Like, you handle things, the space is different, right? And so, like, that really helped me when I started to quantify. I joke a lot about, like, the U.S. Capitol, because we built it for free not once but twice. I start to quantify, like, even in my state, even in my region, like, there's a lot of unpaid debt here. What chattel enslavement did is give if we just want to keep it 100, chattel enslavement gave the whole global world the startup funds to have global enterprise, but it damn sure was the startup funds for America to be a major player in global industry. And when you know that for yourself, then you have what I call a posture of demand, which is all y'all owe me money all the damn time, and I don't owe you anything. And one of the things that supremacy culture does, especially for people who, like me, really ingest the idea of Black excellence and respectability politic, it would have us thinking the opposite is true. That I owe people for giving me this opportunity. That I owe y'all for allowing me to work here. That I owe you because you decided that you were going to hire me as the one Black woman in a company or in a department with 30 people who don't look like me. It creates this feeling like I owe you. And that's a lie. And that's not true. It's not true. And once you recognize that, then you realize that I shouldn't have to, as a person, I shouldn't have to walk around feeling like I have to earn respect or earn rest or earn joy. Because unfortunately, I think those systems would have us thinking that we do have to earn those things. And one of the ways I wanted to really paint this picture, I was thinking about, now I'm going to go like down the river. That's how I am. I'm very like Southern in that regard. I don't know how to tell a short story. But I was thinking about this. So an iPhone, the phone that I'm using is, and if somebody could just like put a comment in just to make sure that y'all can still hear me, that would be fine, or a heart face or something, because I swear every time I do a live, my phone does real weird glitchy shit, and I'm always like, oh gosh, I hope I'm not talking to myself. But so this iPhone is comprised of, hi Chris, this iPhone is comprised of metals. It has things like, now look at my face because I'm pretty sure I looked this up once, but it has precious metals in it, like gold and silver and iron and other shit that I don't know how to pronounce, okay? And those things are combined with technology. You have an iPhone that probably costs like $16.70 to make, but Apple can charge $1 gazillion for it. But I want us to go back to those precious metals. Those precious metals were found in nature, in land, in mountains, and forests, and rivers that belong to the global community. And all of that shit is free. Or at least it was free at one point until colonial settlerism made it. Facts, Tony. Tony is saying 90% of the raw materials in iPhones come from Africa. I believe you. And that's part of the reason why China came and recolonized that shit, right? But this is stuff that was freely a part of our global society. And colonial settler projects said we need things like flags and boundaries and labels, etc., 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 as a way to control the means of production, right? No, I mean, you might be right. I wouldn't be surprised if it were higher. So, we have been conditioned to believe that shit that was free to humanity now gets to belong to 14 rich old white guys. And that's the story that we've heard for generations, for centuries to centuries. And so that's become normal. And so, again, part of what comes with that, I call it the trifecta of evil. It's capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. But part of what comes with that is this feeling like, for me to have any semblance of what those 12 rich white guys have, I have to work to earn it. So for me to have pleasure and joy and rest and ease in my life, that means I have to do something to deserve it. And that's a lie. That's some bullshit, right? Humans shouldn't have to work to earn things that initially were free, right? And I don't want this to become a socialist rant when I start talking about why no one should be paying for food, but that's neither here or there. So a posture of demand really helps us understand that the things that I've been taught that I need to earn are really my birthright. And for Black people in particular, in the United States and across the Americas, we paid the startup cost. Our ancestors paid the startup cost. Our ancestors were the ones who provided the startup capital that made all of this shit a thing. And once you know that deeply, then you can have a posture of demand, and you can stop feeling like you have to earn shit that really is your birthright. And so that leads to the last thing that I wanted to talk to you all tonight about, which is I am going to be calling in Black for the month of February. And I've been using the term Blackout 2022, but I know that can be a little confusing because there was a blackout in 2019 by black content creators on TikTok. But I am calling it back for the month of February, and I wanted to expand a little bit about that. And I also wanted to encourage other Black creatives and to consider investigating what something like that can mean for you on a personal, but also on a communal level. So first thing I want to do is define the different, for me, what I'm defining as the difference between community work and consumption work. So because Black people came to this country with the intention to have our labor consumed, and to be fair, most people who we would identify as people of color came to the country with the idea that they were supposed to be laborers. So, for example, there's lots of receipts that talk about the different changes. Hey, sis, the different changes in immigration policy depending on what the means of production needed. So if there were moments where Congress supported high levels of immigration, it's largely because there were certain production needs that needed to be met. So the railroad needed to be built. Manufacturing needed to occur. I mean, manufacturing is the reason why half of the people who are white in the United States are white, because they were made and enfranchised into whiteness due to the needs of the Industrial Revolution. But that is not the conversation we're having tonight either. So we do live in a world where the assertion is that Black and brown folks' labor is why they're here, right? In the story of the American dream, only 12 people were supposed to ever be dreamers. Everybody else was supposed to be the workers who made those dreams manifest. So back to what I was saying, community versus consumption work. So when I think about community work that can happen in any space, but particularly social media space, we're talking about reciprocity happening. So like, for example, me sharing an idea or presenting information, and then that gets met with honor and high regard. Community work is constructive, and it builds and it inspires, right? It's having a conversation where I share something and then someone shares something, and it's like, oh, and what about this? And what about that, right? And it's highly relational, and it's about seeing the full person, seeing Tony and seeing Kayla and seeing all the different people who are inspiring me and finding new ways to encourage their creativity, and that encourages my creativity in the process. That's all community work. But there's a lot of consumption that happens in these spaces too. And so consumption is really focused on transaction. It's the payment of goods and services. Now, I want to be clear, because you're going to see me online saying, pay me, #pay Black women. But there's a way in which the exchange of, and I had this conversation with someone recently, gosh, and now I can't remember who it was. Oh, shit. Oh, gosh. And they brought up Nigeria, and it was so awesome. Okay, I'll probably remember it later. But there's a way that payment still gets to live in a relational space, right? And so, Kayla, if you want to cuss me out later, you can, or you can cuss me out in the comments, but I'd rather you try to call me in first. But I'm part of Kayla's Patreon, all right? And that is a relational thing, right? Like, I am giving fake ass money, because money ain't real, but that's not the conversation we're having tonight either. But it does have material consequence. Let me be clear. Money is abstract. It does have material consequence. Same thing as race. The racial construct, fake as hell, still has material consequence. So that, me being a part of Kayla's Patreon community is relational. I'm paying money, but that's to honor her labor, honor her gift, her creativity, those things. That's different than transactional. Transactional is leave the money on the bed and turn around and cut the lights off. It is, I want a good a service, and that is divorced from seeing your fullness. It is divorced from seeing your humanity, right? And so what we see a lot in social media, on online spaces, is the transactional. It is looking at TikTok videos of Black creators just so you can consume their talent, consume whatever they did, and then replicate it and make it part of a chain of distribution. And so, unfortunately, in a space that should be creating community work, we see a lot of consumption happen. All right. And I mean, I'm not in charge of how I get interpreted. And even though I do everything to encourage community, that doesn't mean that I don't get consumed. And it doesn't mean that people don't consume me as part of a larger chain of distribution. But part of the reason why I'm calling in Black in the month of February is because I know that my intent will be to super serve the Black community by telling our stories in truth. And I'll be doing that in community, but so much of that will be consumed. And I'm tired. I'm really tired. And I'm not the only person who's tired. And there's this thing called the alpha consumer. Now, on the Anti-Blackness reader, I feel really fortunate enough that I have and I continuously work and reflect to make sure that this is a space that tells Black stories, that tells Black triumph, but also shares Black pain and speaks to the communal trauma that we experience. And so part of the reason why, and this is a little background information that might be helpful, but part of the reason why I created another platform called the Divesting from Whiteness platform is because I found myself constantly talking about racism and white supremacy in this space, and I didn't want to. I wanted to keep this a space that was for Black richness and culture and identity and exploration, and not having to talk about the ways we have to fight to survive all the time. And so what I know to be true is that in the other space I occupy online, there's the idea of the alpha consumers out there, which is people who adapt a product to validate it. And that's often what happens in racial justice spaces, is that Black people, brown people are sharing our truths about what needs to be done for racial justice to occur. And then white people are often able to decide if they're going to adopt the product, meaning are they going to believe us, accept our experience, accept our truth, and then are they going to validate it? And it's a really kind of vicious cycle that I spend a lot of time reflecting on and making sure I'm conscious of that. And so that work is all exhausting. It can be super consuming. And I don't want to spend a month that is supposed to be honoring our triumphs, negotiating and dealing with if people are going to validate that or not. Especially because the performativity that's tied to affinity months, and that's not just limited to Black History Month. This is what happens with AAPI Month. This is what happens with Latina Heritage Month. I mean, these affinity months that are intended to be spaces for honoring people's truth, to honor people's indigenous ancestries, instead become a month of hijinks and performativity that is exhausting to negotiate. So I made a decision that I wasn't going to do it this month. And so that is why I'm calling in Black in February. But I also encourage other Black people to, if they have if it's a direction that they feel pulled into, to consider it. But here is here are some of the real-time challenges of that. For Black content creators, for Black advocates in the social on the TikToks in social media, there's the nature of the violent algorithms to negotiate. So I call it Instagram math, right? So without getting into much details, also I don't know all the details, right? So to be fair, I don't know all the X's and Y's. But the Instagram math tells us that people are most likely going to see Keena's content when they have a lot of engagement with it. But they can only have a lot of engagement with it when they see consistent posts. So for example, Instagram will show users my content if they have liked a lot of my things. But in order for people to have access to have liked a lot of my things, I had to consistently post in the first place. So because I consistently posted in the IG, I was able to be part of their feed. And the more that I'm part of their feed, the more they like my content. And then the more they like my content, the higher up I get in the feed. So it's really this circular monster to a certain extent. And so for any Black creator, and I think this is across the board, whether we're talking about Instagram, whether we're talking about TikTok, Twitter, whatever the thing, to take that time off comes with consequences to the Instagram math, so to speak. And so I'm going to be posting this week some things that I think can speak to those challenges and ways people can support. And by people, I mean people who are not people. Oh my gosh, here we go. Okay, sorry. Yeah. I got a little distracted. My beautiful friend just showed up in the space. So I'm going to be, in the next couple of days, posting some content that I think will meet that challenge. But mostly what I want to inspire people who are not Black. And so this includes white people, but also other people of color, to really provide some support that would allow Black folks to have access to posting software, posting apps that will let the machine kind of run on its own in some ways. Another thing is, the truth is, a lot of Black folks are out here making a living via social media. So selling merchandise and creating learning communities. I'm one of those Black people. And so to not be creating content in some ways can have some really direct impacts on somebody's pocketbook. And so another way folks can be supportive is by saying, hey, I'm going to donate this amount of money so that this person can take some time off and not have to be feeding the machine during Black History Month. And so I want to be honest in naming that making that decision to step back can also have real material consequence. But not speaking for the whole, speaking for myself, I am in this moment I don't want to say this. Unfortunately, Affinity Months have become high tide for performance. It just has, and MLK Day was one of those days where I made a decision not to engage because I knew that people were acting an ass out there on the internet. And the next day I saw receipts that proved that people were acting an ass on the internet. And so why should I pour out so much energy and time in creating so much beautiful content about our history here in the United States when it's going to be consumed and not honored, and 22,000 people are going to be paying attention and it's not honored? People aren't investigating, not reflecting. And that's what I mean by honor. I'm not just talking about people giving money. That's definitely a part of it. But taking the time to reflect. I think that as Black people, and this isn't just Black people who are on social media, it's if you're Black and in real estate, if you're Black and you're teaching, if you're Black and you work at a restaurant. I mean, we joke a lot about what would the world do or be if we didn't show up one day. But if we didn't show up one day, all of this would fall apart. All of the things. TikTok wouldn't even exist if Black people weren't doing their Black people magic on it. And I really want us to sit with that we are the oil that makes so many engines move every damn day throughout the global world. And so once we start to really understand that and process that and live with that truth, I think it would be easier for us to occupy a posture of demand and to say to everybody who can hear, yeah, I ain't doing that shit. So, month of February, calling in Black, trying to really incorporate some joy, some rest, living in that posture of demand. I'm going to put energy in communal work and less in consumption. And I encourage you all to think about doing the same. Good night.